The budget bill is bad, and President Trump should not sign it. It's a perfect example of the swamp not being drained, and it actually hurts our border security efforts. As far as the border wall, Trump says he has $8 billion to pay for it, and the Democrats are ready to pounce. All that and more. I'm Bobby Eberle. This is a 13-minute news hour.
And God bless the United States of America.
Okay, on our last show, I mentioned this spending bill that was being put together by a 17-member bipartisan bicameral committee that was going to send this over to Trump. And I said, sign it, move on, fund the rest of the wall on your own. And now I'm changing my advice because the analysis of this bill is way worse than people thought. It's not a good bill, and it actually hurts our efforts. So here's one thing to keep in mind is that this whole argument over the past couple weeks has been on border security. But we have to look at the bigger picture. Congress and the president haven't been proposing full fiscal year budgets for years. Congress hasn't been passing them, so we don't have a full budget. So this is why we have these government shutdowns, because we have to fund for a short period of time and then fund again because we don't have a budget. So this is one of those bills. It's not just border security negotiations. That's coming through the Department of Homeland Security. Well, this bill covers 8 different departments. It comes out to $333 billion, and all it shows from failures on both the Democrats and the Republican side and President Trump's side is that the swamp isn't being drained. Government continues to grow. So right there, it's a bad bill. Let's just take a look at some of the swampiness of the bill. National Endowments of Arts, funding increase. IRS, funding increase. EPA's fully funded. Commerce Department's getting an extra $1 billion. And on and on. These are just some of the bullet points that I pointed out or picked out for you guys today, because it just shows that nothing is changing. As conservatives, we want to shrink government. And this is one thing that hasn't been addressed ever, basically. Conservatives run on it. People who are in Washington will not pass anything in this spending bill. Just it's pet projects, it's increases in departments, and it just goes against everything we stand for as far as limited, smaller government. And Trump should veto it right on that. Just have a continuing resolution for 2 weeks, fund at current levels, fix what's going on in government, and also fix what's going on at our border. Because as far as border security, the whole essence of what this bill was about, it's a bad deal. Now, there's some great analysis out there. Mark Krikorian over at Center for Immigration Studies, he's written a great piece that's on their website and I believe on National Review. And Daniel Horowitz over at Conservative Review has put together 5 items that really show just how bad this bill is as far as immigration and border security. And I want to dive into those so you guys can have some ammunition to talk about later as far as you're making your own personal decision on what the president should do, and also talking with friends and colleagues as well. So let's dive into some of these bullet points. First of all, the bill limits the president's ability to construct barriers to just the Rio Grande Valley sector and only bollard fencing, not concrete walls of any kind. Further, Section 231 prohibits construction even within the Rio Grande Valley in 5 locations that are either federal or state lands. So along the border of Texas, you've got a mix of private and public lands. And so obviously the federal government would want to avoid, private land negotiations and things like that and go to the public lands. Well, this bill says, nope, you can't do it. In this area where you have, where you're allowed to build it, there are certain areas now that are off limits in this bill that President Trump's about to sign. In addition to that, let's go to number 2. Section 232A of the bill states that prior to use of any funds made available by this act for the construction of physical barriers, the Department of Homeland Security shall confer and seek to reach mutual agreement regarding the design and alignment of physical barriers within that city. What that means is that in order to construct the walls, the federal government basically has to have the approval of the local city governments. And along this area of the Texas border that we're talking about for this 55 miles are some of the most liberal left-wing Democrat governments. So this bill basically gives them veto power to say no to Trump's wall plans and construction in those areas. It's just a bad deal. So let's move on to number 3. Section 224A prohibits the deportation of anyone who is sponsoring an unaccompanied minor illegal alien, or who says they might sponsor a UAC, or lives in a household with a UAC, or a household that potentially might sponsor a UAC. All this is right here is as bad as President Trump talks about sex trafficking and child trafficking. This provision makes it worse, because now illegal aliens who are on the verge of deportation can simply call up to some of these smugglers, these human traffickers, say, I need a kid. And they smuggle a kid in, and this person can claim to be a sponsor, or not even a sponsor, thinking about a sponsor, or living in a house that has a sponsor. It opens it up for more gang members to flood into this country and more illegal immigration. That provision is absolutely insane. But of course, there's more. Let's look at number 4. The bill adds another $40 million for the Alternatives to Detention program, which moves asylum seekers to facility in the interior of the country where they are usually released. So rather than handling this at the border with the detention areas that we fund for ICE, they have these alternative programs. And now they've actually expanded that. So more people will be moved into the interior, which they're not watched, they're not guarded, they're kind of left on their own to say, hey, seek asylum this way. Well, their intention was not to seek asylum in the first place, and they knew it. Their idea was to get into the country and then just disappear. And now this provision allows them to do that. They report to these facilities, these alternative centers, and then they never show up again. This bill just increased funding for that program. Number 5, doubling low-skilled workers. This bill is page 1161, doubles the number of H-2B non-agricultural unskilled seasonal workers who continue to be a public charge on America. So we're allowing more people in with these work visas. And what do they always say is even the Democrats say, is one of the biggest common causes of illegal immigration when they're trying to say that, they're not coming through the border walls and things like that, is people coming in legally and overstaying their visas. Well, now we just taken a section of visas and doubled those numbers and allow people to stay even longer, more people to come in and overstay their visas and just disappear into society. And we're sanctioning it with this bill. It is a bad bill. President should not sign it. We should return to our core beliefs of limiting government and being serious about border security. So assume he does sign it. He's saying that there's only $1.375 billion for the wall. He has now found $8 billion to fund the wall project that he wants to do. And it comes in the form of this. Here's what he's looking at doing. $600 million coming from Treasury Department forfeiture funds, $2.5 billion from Pentagon drug interdiction money, $3.5 billion from the military construction budget, and then the $1.375 approved by Congress. That gets him to about $8 billion. Most of it would require declaring a state of national emergency. And here's what Nancy Pelosi had to say about that.
Just think of what a president with different values can present to the American people. You want to talk about a national emergency? Let's talk about today, the 1-year anniversary of another manifestation of the epidemic of gun violence in America. That's a national emergency. Why don't you declare that emergency, Mr. President? I wish you would. But a Democratic president can do that. Democratic president can declare emergencies as well.
So she's already making threats. Her example is quite ridiculous in that a president would declare a national emergency on the Second Amendment to try and confiscate guns. And they are trying to scare people into believing that President Trump is doing something that's unconstitutional when since 1979, we've had 58 declared national emergencies since 1979, the last 40 years. That's about 1.5 national emergencies per year for the last 40 years. So it's not unprecedented. It's actually quite common. It's done for a number of reasons. And President Trump wants to do it to protect our borders. And the other thing Nancy Pelosi said in her press conference is she tried to talk about the illusion of this border crisis, where all you have to do is look at the facts and see with the drugs and the murders and the crimes and the sex trafficking, if that's not a crisis, I don't know what is. I mean, how much damage is done during a hurricane? How many people might lose their lives? Now compare that to the lives lost through illegal immigration, through drug addiction, through human trafficking and smuggling and murder and crime. This is a national emergency. Trump needs to act, but he needs to get a bill that actually makes sense and actually helps in the fight against illegal immigration, actually protects our border, and does the right thing. This bill doesn't do it, and he shouldn't sign it. Finally, I just want to go over a little update on what's going on in Virginia. As you know, that state is a mess. You had Democrat Governor Northam go on the radio and basically say that infanticide is okay, that a woman could have a baby, and while the baby's sitting there, then they would decide if the baby would live or die. Now, of course, conservatives were outraged on this, but the media and the Democrats, they didn't care, one way or the other. It just didn't make news. So that's the number one position. Then the number two, Justin Fairfax, is being accused of rape, and another person has come forward with a sexual assault claim. So he's in bad trouble too. Then it came out that both Northam and the number three official dressed in blackface. And that's the one that put everybody over the edge for a while. The media jumped on board. Democrats jumped on board. People were saying he should resign. But then with all these other troubles, started to realize, well, maybe it's not that big of a deal when it comes to the fact that a Republican might take over. Do we want to lose a Democrat? Do we have these beliefs? Do we hold them strongly enough? And the answer is no. Just take a look. You have the Virginia Black Caucus. This Gregory McLemore came out with a statement that basically said, we need to support our fellow Democrats. United you stand, divided you fall. So this is the leader of the Virginia Black Caucus who's basically saying, well, for a Democrat, blackface doesn't matter, which is kind of good to know that now when it comes to it, this issue that's caused a national uproar is not a big deal, because I was getting a little worried because there's pictures out there, not of me, but there is one picture floating around with my sister when we were kids, and she's dressed in Jawa face. Now, if blackface isn't a big deal, then Jawa face surely isn't. And I know I can rest at ease because guilt by association, now it's not a big deal. I came a little late for Megyn Kelly, but now we know that Democrats don't think it's a big deal. Media doesn't think it's a big deal. And Northam's probably going to keep his job. So there you have it. That's our week in politics right there. President Trump should not sign the bill. I gave you some pointers. Please leave your comments. Let me know what you think about the bill. Dive in. If there's things I left off, let me know. Please subscribe and please tell your friends about it. Have a great weekend. I'm Bobby Everly. This is a 13-minute news hour.